here. You biological weapons, nuclear weapons. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is like serious stuff. We should be careful. So it is possible to kind of have a more rational response, right? If you believe this risk is real.
Believe.
Yes. So, is it possible to have a scientific approach to the prediction of the future?
I mean, we just went through this with COVID.
Yeah.
What do we know about modeling?
Well, I mean,
what do we learn about modeling with COVID?
There's a lot of lessons.
They didn't work at all.
They worked poorly.
The models were terrible. The models were useless.
I don't know if the models were useless or the people interpreting the models and then the centralized institutions that were creating policy rapidly based on the models and leveraging the models in order to support their narratives versus actually interpreting the error bars in the models and all that kind of stuff.
What you had with COVID, my view, what you had with COVID is you had these experts showing up. They claimed to be scientists, and they had no testable hypotheses whatsoever. They had a bunch of models. They had a bunch of forecasts, and they had a bunch of theories, and they laid these out in front of policymakers, and policymakers freaked out and panicked, right? And implemented a whole bunch of really terrible decisions that we're still living with the consequences of. Mm-hmm. And there was never any empirical foundation to any of the models. None of them ever came true.
Yeah, to push back, there were certainly Baptists and bootleggers in the context of this pandemic, but there's still a usefulness to models, no?
So not if they're reliably wrong, right? Then they're actually anti-useful, right? They're actually damaging.
But what do you do with a pandemic? What do you do with any kind of threat? Don't you want to kind of have several models to play with as part of the discussion of what the hell do we do here?
I mean, do they work? Is there an expectation that they actually work, that they have actual predictive value? I mean, as far as I can tell with COVID, we just the policymakers just psyop themselves into believing that there was substance. I mean, look, the scientists were at fault. The quote unquote scientists showed up. Mm-hmm. So I had some insight into this. So there was remember the Imperial College models out of London were the ones that were these are the gold standard models.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine runs a big software company, and he was like, wow, this is COVID's really scary. And he's like, he contacted this research, and he's like, do you need some help? You've been just building this model on your own for 20 years. Do you need some, would you like us, our coders, to basically restructure it so it can be fully adapted for COVID? And the guy said yes and sent over the code. And my friend said it was the worst spaghetti code he's ever seen.
That doesn't mean it's not possible to construct a good model of pandemic with the correct error bars, with a high number of parameters that are continuously, many times a day, updated as we get more data about a pandemic. I would like to believe when a pandemic hits the world, the best computer scientists in the world, the best software engineers respond aggressively and as input, take the data that we know about the virus, and as an output, say, here's what's happening in terms of how quickly it's spreading, what that lead in terms of hospitalization and deaths and all that kind of stuff. Here's how contagious it likely is. Here's how deadly it likely is based on different conditions, based on different ages and demographics and all that kind of stuff. So here's the best kinds of policy. It feels like you could have models, machine learning, that kind of, they don't perfectly predict the future, but they help you do something, because there's pandemics that are meh, they don't really do much harm, and there's pandemics, you can imagine them, they could do a huge amount of harm. They can kill a lot of people. So you should probably have some kind of data-driven models that keep updating, that allow you to make decisions that are based how bad is this thing? Now, you can criticize how horrible all of that went with the response to this pandemic, but I just feel like there might be some value to models.
So to be useful at some point, it has to be predictive, right? So the easy thing for me to do is to say, obviously, you're right. Obviously, I want to see that just as much as you do, because anything that makes it easier to navigate through society through a wrenching, risk like that is, that sounds great. The harder objection to it is just simply you are trying to model a complex dynamic system with 8 billion moving parts, not possible.
It's very tough.
Can't be done. Complex systems can't be done.
Machine learning says hold my beer, but it's possible. No,
I don't know. I would like to believe that it is.
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. I think where you and I would agree is I think we would like that to be the case. We are strongly in favor of it. I think we would also agree that no such thing with respect to COVID or pandemics, no such thing. At least neither you nor I think are aware. I'm not aware of anything like that today.
My main worry with the response to the pandemic is that same as with aliens, is that even if such a thing existed, and it's possible it existed, the policymakers were not paying attention. Like there was no mechanism that allowed those kinds of models to percolate up.
Oh, I think we had the opposite problem during COVID. I think the policymakers, I think these people with basically fake science had too much access to the policymakers.
Well, right, but the policymakers also they had a narrative in mind, and they also wanted to use whatever model that fit that narrative to help them out. So like it felt like there was a lot of politics and not enough science.
Yeah, although a big part of what was happening, a big reason we got lockdowns for as long as we did was because these scientists came in with these like doomsday scenarios that were like just like completely off the hook.
Scientists in quotes. Let's not
quote unquote scientists.
Let's not. Okay, let's give love to science. That is the way out.
Science is a process of testing hypotheses.
Yeah.
Modeling does not involve testable hypotheses, right? Like I don't even know that. I don't even know that modeling actually qualifies as science. Maybe that's a side conversation we could have sometime over a beer.
It's really interesting. But what do we do about